I never thought the knock on the door would change everything. Hi, I'm Sarah. And just hours after burying my husband, I sat alone in a house, so silent it hurt. Until Lucas, my son's best friend, showed up unexpectedly. Standing there under the porch light, he wasn't the teenager I remembered. He was a man with eyes full of quiet understanding. What followed was a night that blurred grief and healing in a way I never imagined possible. Have you ever had someone appear in your life just when you needed them most, even when you didn't know you did? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. And the house felt heartbreakingly empty after the funeral. Sarah sat alone at the dining table, a long cold cup of coffee before her, her blank gaze fixed on nothing. The room that had once been filled with laughter was now weighed down by silence, as if even the walls themselves sighed under the burden of loss. Sarah was no longer the strong, lively woman her friends knew. Now, in middle age, she suddenly felt small, lost inside her own home. She had lost her husband, the companion, the one who shared every joy and sorrow. His passing was too great a shock, dragging with it not just the grief of a wife, but the feeling of losing a part of herself. Sarah thought she had prepared herself emotionally, but no, nothing could prepare her for this emptiness. She let her hands fall to her lap, the ticking of the wall clock echoing like a cruel reminder of time passing. Everything had slowed down. Life had cruelly slowed down. Just then, there was a soft knock at the door. Sarah startled. She hadn't expected anyone in the evening. Most friends and relatives had come by during the day, then left, leaving her to face the long night alone. She stood up, walking slowly to the door, her heart sinking, a mix of surprise and caution. When she opened it, standing before her was Lucas, her son's best friend. Under the porch light, Lucas was no longer the lanky teenager who had once spent hours gaming in her living room, laughing loud and falling asleep on the couch. Now, Lucas stood tall, mature, his eyes carrying a trace of life experience beyond his 22 years. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Sarah," Lucas said, his voice deep and sincere. Sarah tried to smile, but the tightness in her throat only let her manage a small nod. She couldn't speak. The grief had stolen her words. Lucas, a bit awkward, lifted a small container in his hands. "I brought some food. I made it myself. I thought maybe you hadn't eaten." Sarah looked at the container, a pang tightening in her chest. Such a small gesture, and yet, in that moment, it felt like it cracked through the thick ice encasing her heart. "Thank you, Lucas," she finally managed to say. She opened the door wider, motioning for him to come in. Inside, the house seemed to brighten ever so slightly with Lucas's presence. He set the food down in the kitchen, then turned back to look at Sarah, his face full of concern. "Are you holding up okay?" Sarah gave a sad little smile. "I'm trying." Her voice trembled and her eyes glistened with tears she hadn't even realized were there. Lucas stepped a little closer, gently placing his hand over hers. Not a polite touch, but a real one. Steady, warm. Sarah felt a wave of heat rush up her spine. How long had it been since someone had held her hand? Since someone had cared in this simple, genuine way? She wanted to pull her hand back, to retreat into her shell of grief, but she didn't. She realized she needed connection. She needed someone to remind her that she still existed, that she was still alive. "Would you like to stay for a while?" Sarah asked softly, before she even had time to think it through. Lucas nodded, his gaze gentle. "I'm here, if you need me." The two of them moved into the living room, where the soft couches had once witnessed so many family memories. Sarah sat down, pulling a light blanket over her lap, while Lucas sat across from her, keeping a respectful but caring distance. In that moment, Sarah felt her heart lighten just a little. Lucas's presence was like a delicate thread, pulling her back to reality, a place where the pain didn't completely consume her, where she could still be seen, still be heard. At night, Sarah no longer felt entirely alone. And from that moment, the story began to turn onto a new path, a path she herself had never imagined. Sarah let out a quiet sigh, feeling the warmth of the light blanket on her lap seep into her cold skin. She looked over at Lucas, the young man sitting across from her, silent, as if afraid to break the fragile space between them. A soft yellow light cast down on his face, revealing the mature features Sarah hadn't yet had time to notice. In her memory, Lucas was still the skinny boy with the wide grin, running into the kitchen to ask for more cookies. But now, standing before her was a young man, with broad shoulders, deep eyes, and an unusual calmness for someone his age. "I meant to come by earlier," Lucas said softly, with a slight shrug, his voice gentle. "I just didn't know if I'd be bothering you." Sarah shook her head lightly. "No, you're not bothering me at all." She pressed her lips together, feeling her throat go dry. I'm glad you came." A brief silence passed between them. Lucas glanced around the room, where family photos still hung neatly on the walls. Photos of Sarah and her husband smiling together under autumn trees. He looked at them with a pensive gaze, touched with a bit of wistfulness, a bit of tenderness. "I miss him a lot," Lucas said, his voice dropping lower. "He always made jokes, always made us laugh when we came over." Sarah felt a wave of grief rise up inside her. She gripped the cup in her hands as if to hold on to some fragile stability. "I miss him too, Lucas. I still can't believe it all happened so quickly." Lucas shifted slightly closer, moving slowly, carefully. "Mrs. Sarah, if you need anything, anytime, you know I'm here, right?" Sarah looked into those sincere eyes and felt her heart soften. She gave a small nod, saying nothing more. They began talking, at first just light questions. Lucas's work, life at university, his friends, random stories about her son, who was currently away on a business trip, leaving Sarah alone amid the sea of her sorrow. Gradually, the conversation drifted into more painful memories. Sarah spoke of her husband, of the mornings when he made coffee and set it on the table beside fresh flowers, of the evenings when they curled up together under an old blanket watching movies. Lucas didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice. He just listened, with his whole heart. "I'm afraid I'll never feel that again," Sarah confessed, her voice trembling. "I'm afraid I'll grow old, alone, with no one by my side." Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out, placing his hand over Sarah's, this time more naturally, no longer hesitant. "Mrs. Sarah, you're not alone. There are so many people who care about you. I care too." Sarah felt a wave of warmth rush through her body, not just from the touch, but from his voice, from the way Lucas looked at her, as if she wasn't just a grieving woman, but a human being worthy of care, of love. She gave a soft laugh, gently dabbing at the corner of her eyes. "Thank you, Lucas. I really don't know how I'd manage without people like you." Lucas smiled, and in that moment, the small room seemed to grow much warmer. They continued talking, their quiet laughter mingling with the steady ticking of the wall clock. Sarah didn't yet know that with just one night of conversation, one night that seemed so trivial, an invisible thread had formed between her and Lucas. A thread neither of them could yet name, but one that was slowly drawing two lonely souls closer together. And that night, as Sarah walked Lucas to the door and watched his figure disappear into the darkness, she suddenly realized perhaps tonight wasn't just an ordinary visit. Perhaps this was the sign of a turning point, a path she had never imagined she would step onto. The door closed behind Lucas, but instead of leaving, as Sarah had thought, he hesitated, turning back, his eyes glimmering under the porch light. "Mrs. Sarah, if you don't mind, could I stay a little longer? I feel like you might not be ready to sleep yet." Sarah was briefly surprised, but then gave a small nod. She couldn't deny that Lucas' presence made the house feel less empty. She opened the door a bit wider. "Come in, Lucas. I don't want to be alone right now either." They returned to the living room. Sarah boiled a kettle of water and took out 2 cups of chamomile tea, the kind she usually made on sleepless nights. Lucas sat on the sofa, his hands clasped together, his eyes quietly observing the photo frames and the old books weathered by time. "You seem to like classic literature," Lucas remarked when he noticed old editions of Jane Eyre and Anna Karenina on the shelf. Sarah gave a tired smile. "I like imperfect stories. The more real, the more haunting, the more they make you think." She set the teacup down on the table in front of Lucas. The rising steam blended into the space like a warm mist. They both lifted their cups, taking the first sip in silence. Lucas was the first to speak. I still remember the first time I met him. He laughed so hard I almost dropped my game box. Sarah let out a soft laugh, a rare sound from her dry lips. He was always like that, warm, a little loud. This house, it's been so quiet since he left. Lucas hesitated, then gently said, "Feel the same, Mr. Sarah. I lost my dad when I was young. You and your husband were the first people who ever made me feel like I had a real family." Those words made Sarah pause. She had never seen Lucas as someone carrying loss. He had always been cheerful, friendly, as if no sorrow was big enough to touch him. "Some losses are quieter than people think, aren't they?" Sarah said, her voice softening. Lucas nodded. "I think sometimes we survive our wounds by smiling and pretending we're okay." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Suddenly, the age gap between them seemed to dissolve. She no longer saw Lucas as her son's best friend, but as an adult, carrying silent gaps much like her own. "You've really grown up," she murmured, unable to hide her emotion. "Nothing little boys spilling milk in the kitchen anymore." Lucas smiled. "I can still spill some if you want to feel that again." They both laughed, gently, sincerely, and with deep feeling. The laughter wasn't loud, but it was enough to warm a corner of the heart that had felt frozen. They sat there a while longer without needing many words. Simply two lonely souls allowed to lean on each other on a night that was just too quiet. And in that moment, Sarah realized sometimes healing doesn't begin with a clear plan, but with a cup of hot tea, a knowing glance, and someone who doesn't walk away when you fall silent. Sarah leaned softly against the back of the chair, her hands tightly gripping the cup of tea that had long gone cold. The pale yellow light in the living room cast an unfamiliar gentleness over Lucas. Not the playful 22-year-old she used to know, but a young man carrying a maturity, patience, and a kind of tenderness she hadn't realized she needed so much. "Mrs. Hare?" Lucas spoke, hesitating for a moment. "Do you ever feel like when you lose someone, they take a part of yourself with them?" Sarah turned to look at him, her eyes slightly blurred with tears. "Yes, I've asked myself so many times, if I was once someone joyful, someone strong, how much of that is even left now?" They sat in silence for a while, the ticking of the clock sounding loud and distinct with each passing second. Sarah shivered slightly, unsure if it was from the cold or from the questions that had just surfaced from deep inside her heart. Lucas noticed. He got up, walked over to the cabinet to retrieve a light blanket and gently draped it over her shoulders. His hand briefly brushed her delicate bare shoulder, making her flinch slightly. "Thank you, Lucas." Her voice was hoarse, as if at any moment it might crack into a sob. "There's no need to thank me," Lucas whispered. "I'm here." Sarah looked up, her eyes meeting that warm gaze. In a sudden, unexpected moment, she felt herself wanting to hold on to something, anything, that could bring back the feeling of being cared for, of being present. "You know," she murmured, "what I used to fear the most was the feeling of becoming invisible. No one seeing me, no one touching me, as if I had disappeared along with the one who left." Lucas didn't respond right away. He sat down beside her a little closer. "I see you, Sarah," he said sincerely, his eyes glowing softly under the light. "Harriet, I see you more clearly than ever." Sarah felt her chest tighten. A vague pain, part grief, part longing, part unexpected comfort, crept through her. She let out a soft laugh, though the tears had already started falling without her noticing. I'm sorry, Sir Lucas. I didn't mean to be this weak." Lucas shook his head, his hand gently touching the back of hers. "Being weak isn't a bad thing. I think sometimes it's when we're weak that we're most truly ourselves." His hand was warm, enveloping hers. Sarah instinctively gripped it tightly, as if afraid that if she let go, everything would vanish. The feeling left her both flustered and moved. How many years had it been since she'd allowed anyone this close to her hidden wounds? "Lucas!" Sarah exhaled slowly. You're so kind that sometimes I know how to keep the right distance. Lucas didn't look away. If you want, I can step back, but if you need, I can also stay. That sentence, simple, unforced, without expectation, was like a gentle knock against the walls Sarah had built around herself all this time. She didn't say anything, just leaned softly against the firm shoulder beside her, allowing herself, for the first time in so long, to breathe a little more slowly. That night, in a room filled with the scent of cold tea and unspoken stories, Sarah realized that sometimes unexpected closeness isn't something to fear. It is a reminder that no matter how much you've lost, your heart can still stir, can still reach someone, if you dare to open it one more time. Sarah sat there, feeling the steady rhythm of Lucas's heartbeat echoing close to her ear as she leaned against his shoulder. She couldn't remember the last time she had leaned on someone like this. Since the day she lost her husband, every hug, every attempt at comfort had felt superficial, fleeting. No one had stayed long enough for her to feel truly seen. Lucas said nothing more, simply letting his arm rest gently around Sarah's shoulders, creating a tender space, like a quiet promise. I'm here. Sarah took a long, slow breath, feeling the tension gradually melt from her chest. In that moment, she turned her face upward, her eyes meeting Lucas's gentle gaze. She saw him smile softly. Not the playful grin of a young man, but a calm, patient smile, like someone who had been waiting to reach the most vulnerable part of her. Dab, sir, Lucas murmured her name, his voice dropping low, slightly husky. Hearing him say her name, her heart gave a sudden, forceful thump, as if that very sound had awakened a part of her emotions she had buried too deeply. Sarah began, but then stopped. She didn't know what she meant to say, didn't know if she should say anything at all. All her life, she had controlled herself, kept her distance, maintained her role as the adult. But now, before those patient eyes, every wall she had built suddenly felt meaningless. Lucas didn't ask, didn't push. He simply raised his hand, gently tucking a stray lock of her hair behind her ear. That tender gesture made Sarah shiver slightly, not from fear, but from a long neglected yearning slowly awakening inside her. She looked up, no longer pulling away. Their eyes found each other, and in that fleeting moment, Sarah knew she didn't want to think anymore. Didn't want to analyze whether this was right or wrong, whether she should or shouldn't. Lucas leaned forward slightly, stopping just close enough for Sarah to feel his breath, but leaving enough space for her to pull away if she wished. Sarah didn't pull away. She closed her eyes, letting that distance dissolve as their lips touched, softly but carrying all the unspoken things they had never dared to voice. The kiss was tentative at first, full of hesitation, as if both were afraid to shatter the fragile moment. But when Sarah tilted her head slightly, wrapping her arms around Lucas's neck, she heard his faint breath and then felt his arms tighten around her, no longer holding back. Her heart pounded wildly as the feeling of intimacy slowly spread, the sensation of being held, being touched, being wanted, not just by anyone, but by someone who saw her, truly saw her. Lucas's warm hands moved gently along her arms, unhurried, unpressured, as if simply affirming, I'm here, and I want to be here for you. Sarah let herself relax, let every wall she had built over the years come tumbling down. She heard Lucas whisper softly in her ear, tender words that made her laugh quietly through her tears. She felt his lips brush her cheek, the small scar she had hidden for so many years, before returning to her lips, this time in a deeper, more passionate kiss, as if neither of them wanted to keep any distance anymore. In that quiet room, where only the sounds of thundering heartbeats and quickened breaths remained, Sarah realized just how much she had longed for this feeling. Not just physical closeness, but the sense of being loved, truly loved, without needing to brace herself, without having to be endlessly strong. That night, for the first time in many years, Sarah no longer felt like the lonely woman in a large, empty house. In Lucas's arms, she rediscovered the part of herself she thought she had lost. The part of her heart that could still flutter, still love, still believe in the gentle, unexpected, beautiful things life could offer. The gentle light of early morning slipped through the curtains, casting warm golden streaks across the floor. Sarah stirred slightly, the familiar yet strange scent of the bedding filling her senses, the soft breath of someone brushing against the back of her neck. She opened her eyes, for a brief moment unsure where she was, but then the feeling of a strong arm loosely wrapped around her waist made her freeze. Lucas. A rush of memories from the night before came flooding back, tightening her chest. She closed her eyes, trying to take a deep breath to soothe the rising panic. What have I done? The voice inside her whispered, not in reproach, but in fear. She carefully turned around, seeing Lucas still fast asleep. In the soft morning light, he looked young, peaceful, like a fragment of memory that didn't belong in her stormy life. Sarah gazed at that face for a long while, her hand wanting to reach out and gently touch him, but instead, she clutched the bedsheet tightly, not daring to. Slowly she sat up, pulling the blanket up over her shoulders. The once familiar room now felt foreign, as if in just one night everything had shifted slightly off its old axis. Her heart pounded, caught between sweetness and fear, squeezing tightly in her chest. This was a mistake, wasn't it? She asked herself. She had always been the strong one, the adult, the one who knew how to distinguish right from wrong. And yet last night, she had let every defense crumble in just a few fleeting moments of comfort, of being loved. Beside her, Lucas stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Sarah, he murmured, his voice still drowsy, but his gaze, when it met hers, shone with pure tenderness. I thought you were gone. Those words made Sarah freeze. She pressed her lips together, clasping her hands tightly, looking at Lucas, her heart a swirl of conflicting emotions. Lucas? She spoke softly, her voice slightly trembling. Last night? Lucas propped himself up on one arm, the blanket slipping down to reveal his bare shoulder. He leaned slightly toward her, his gaze still filled with concern. You don't need to say anything, he gently interrupted. I understand, if you regret it. Sarah shook her head quickly, feeling her eyes sting. No, it's not that, she whispered. It's just, I'm scared. I'm older than you. I'm your friend's mother. If anyone finds out, what will they think? What will they say? Lucas gently placed his hand over hers, giving it a soft squeeze. I know, he said slowly. I know this isn't easy, but I don't regret it, Sarah. I don't regret staying, holding your hand, loving you. Those words pierced right through the armor Sarah had just tried to rebuild. Tears shimmered at the corners of her eyes. You don't understand, she murmured, her voice catching. People will look at me, at you, and they will never believe this is something real. Lucas gave a faint smile, reaching out to lightly touch her cheek, his thumb tenderly wiping away the tear that had just fallen. I don't care what they think, he said firmly. I only care about what you think, Sarah. Sarah felt her heart tighten, aching, and warmed all at once. She leaned her head gently against Luca's shoulder, closed her eyes, allowing herself to savor the peaceful feeling, if only for a fleeting moment. But deep inside, the quiet fear still smoldered. Could this fleeting happiness last? Or was this morning merely the beginning of a storm where she would have to face all the unanswered questions waiting ahead? Sarah continued to rest her head on Lucas's shoulder, feeling his warmth seep into every cold, empty space she had carried with her through months of loneliness. But even with her eyes closed, trying to hold herself within this peaceful moment, her mind couldn't stop the fearful whispers. Where will this all lead? Lucas sensed the tension in Sarah's shoulders. He gently tightened his arm around her, his deep, warm voice rising softly, close, steady, reassuring. Sarah, you don't have to decide anything right now. We don't need to think too far ahead. We don't have to force ourselves to know all the answers. Sarah opened her eyes, looking up at him, her gaze a mix of gratitude and worry. But Lucas, she sighed quietly, her voice faltering. I'm so much older than you. I'm not sure I can offer you the kind of future you deserve. Lucas gave a gentle smile, his warm brown eyes crinkling softly. You know what? I never once thought about age when I came here last night. All I knew was I saw a strong, kind woman carrying too much pain. I wanted to be by your side, to do anything I could so you wouldn't feel so empty. He paused for a moment, his hand giving hers a light squeeze. And right now, I still want that. Not just for one night, not just because of a passing moment of weakness, but because I truly want to stay, even if it's just to sit beside you, even if it's just to listen to you share the things that scare you. Sarah bit her lip gently, trying to hold back the sting rising in her nose. You're still so young, Lucas. You don't have to tie yourself to someone like me. Lucas let out a soft laugh, reaching up to lift her chin so their eyes could meet. Could you stop saying things that put yourself down? His voice carried a playful note, but his eyes shimmered with sincere seriousness. You're the one who's taught me all these years what kindness is, what patience is, what caring means. Maybe you don't realize it, but I grew up partly because of the example you set. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, her heart trembling. She had always thought of herself as just a mother, just a quiet woman in the background of Lucas's life story, but it turned out she had left a bigger mark than she had ever imagined. Lucas gently held both her hands, speaking softly. Sarah, I'm not in a hurry. I don't need an answer today, tomorrow, or even next week. I only hope you won't push me away. Just give me a chance to stay by your side to prove that sometimes the most unexpected things can bring the kind of happiness we never dared to dream of. Sarah sat still, her heart racing. Not entirely out of fear, but from that fragile, unfamiliar sensation. For the first time in so long, someone was telling her she didn't have to be strong on her own. She rested her forehead against Lucas' shoulder, closing her eyes softly. Thank you, she whispered. I can't promise anything, Lucas, but I'll try not to run away. Lucas smiled, wrapping his arms just a little more tightly around her. That's all I need, Sarah. We can take it slow. I'm not going anywhere. In that moment, Sarah felt that no matter how many judging eyes waited outside, no matter how many challenges lay ahead, at least here in this small room flooded with soft morning light, she had found a place to breathe, a place where she could remind herself that she was still worthy of love. The days that followed passed neither quickly nor slowly. Sarah still woke up in the morning, made herself a cup of coffee, and looked out the window, where sunlight poured into the kitchen. But one thing had changed. Lucas didn't disappear after that night, didn't quietly drift away like a passing breeze. He still came, always bringing a warm smile and those patient brown eyes. Sometimes he stopped by just to bring Sarah a bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked along the roadside. Other times, he simply sat quietly with her in the living room, not needing to say much, just sharing a silent afternoon together. At first, Sarah maintained a certain distance, not exactly avoidance, but the natural caution of someone too familiar with loss. But Lucas never rushed, never pushed her into making promises or commitments. He was just there, patient like a sturdy wall beside a house, battered by many storms. One afternoon, as Sarah sat reading in her armchair, Lucas walked in carrying a bag of food. I thought we needed a movie and pizza night, he said, his eyes lighting up. Sarah smiled softly, realizing for the first time that his smile had gradually become part of her days. They watched movies, laughed, debated over trivial plot details. Sarah realized she no longer felt as empty as before. Though the pain of losing her husband was still there, it no longer suffocated her the way it once had. She was beginning to understand that grief didn't have to disappear completely for her to continue living. Another evening, as they stood together in the kitchen preparing a meal, Lucas suddenly said, You know, Sarah, I don't think we're replacing anything. I think we're creating something new from everything that's shaped you into who you are today. Sarah paused, the paring knife still in her hand. She looked at Lucas, her heart trembling slightly. That was the moment she realized what she had been afraid of all this time wasn't her feelings for Lucas, but the fear that she might hurt the memory of the husband she had lost. Lucas, you make me feel like I have the right to live again, Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. Lucas stepped closer, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. Because you deserve it, Sarah. None of us only gets one chance to love, to be happy. In the days that followed, Sarah began learning to smile more. She let Lucas pull her out of the house, to stroll through the park, to watch the sunset by the lake, to try cooking new dishes that neither of them were particularly good at but still enjoyed together. She still carried her old memories, but instead of locking herself inside the past, Sarah began weaving those memories into part of a new story, a story that didn't erase what had been lost, but used it as the foundation for what was now being built. Luis wasn't in a hurry, and Sarah wasn't in a hurry either. They let everything unfold at their own pace. Slow, gentle, but no less profound, and little by little, Sarah began to believe that maybe happiness wasn't something she had to abandon the past to reach. Maybe happiness was learning to hold on to the most beautiful parts and move forward with a heart that had once been broken, but was still willing to love again. And just like that, Sarah had begun her journey of healing, not by forgetting what had been lost, but by learning how to hold it in her heart, making space for the new, gentle things life had to offer. Lucas didn't replace anyone. He was simply the one who reminded Sarah that a heart could still beat for joy, could still be moved by warmth, even after enduring so much heartbreak. Life, after all, is not just a string of losses. Sometimes it's about how we find the courage to take the hand that's offered, to remind ourselves that we are still here, still worthy of love. And what about you? Have you ever experienced a moment when someone walked into your life bringing a little light you never expected? Share your story or thoughts in the comments below. Who knows? Your story might just touch someone who's in need of a spark of hope.